Speaking of that, President Cyril Ramaphosa is set to deliver his State of the Nation address this Thursday. It comes amid persisting problems at state-owned entities, the energy crisis and a struggling economy. Business Leadership South Africa's CEO, Busisiwe Mavuso, joins me now via Skype to discuss the importance of the President's speech and what we can expect. And Busisiwe Mavuso, I suppose if the President needed one last pinch, to sort of help him feel the pain that South Africans are going through. That came today with the unemployment figures that are out from Stats South Africa that suggest that despite a battery of interventions, unemployment rate is not budging.
Absolutely. And I think, Thulasizwe, for me, I think he should have taken resonance and probably maybe political cover to a large extent after Moody's actually announced the negative outlook that they gave South Africa in November, where they literally fired the final warning shot to Thulasizwe to say that you had better get your economy in order or else, right? And they said that we're actually giving you up until February to start to see, meaningful changes, to start to see a semblance, of some implementation of the reforms that we've been talking about for the past 2 years. So I would have thought that that would have given the president at least some form of political cover for him to actually to start taking a firm stance on some of the reforms that we've actually been talking about. But that hasn't happened, and it's actually very concerning. And I think what you're seeing in the country today, the unemployment numbers that have just been published, are the real State of the Nation address, right? You're sitting with unemployment, which still remains, at 30%. Thulasizwe, it should be a crisis that we have a third of our population that is unemployed. Should be a crisis that our youth of more than 50% are actually unemployed. The poverty levels, the inequality levels. But I think the most concerning thing is that in terms of the structural reforms that we've been talking about, nothing seems to be moving. You would have seen that when we had the conversation, for instance, at WEF, the international community is actually starting to say, we don't believe that you as South Africa have the ability to actually implement the reforms that you've been talking about. And what that therefore does is that the sentiment from that community therefore is starting to dwindle. Markets are premised on certainty, Thulasizwe, and the lack thereof, unfortunately, is problematic. So I think we're going to have to decide on something. It doesn't have to be something that business like or the international community likes, but I think if you're going to try to get investment into the country, then certainty, unfortunately, is the underlying premise, and that, unfortunately, doesn't exist.
But given the objective situations politically that the president is grappling with, the many constituencies that have a stake in all of this, because, for instance, as you talk about, the reforms that you're talking about, I always use the example of saying, if you're saying lower the government wage bill, for example, you are effectively talking about government sort of getting rid of people that it employs, which won't go down so well among some stakeholders. When you talk about sort out the SOEs, you're potentially talking about getting rid of some of those SOEs and selling them off and saying that, government has no business running these SOEs. So given all of those objective realities, what should the president then prioritize as if you fail at everything else in as far as the reforms are concerned, succeed in this one, in this particular State of the Nation address?
So I'd probably think that, actually offering these SOEs in particular, this false protectionism that we've been giving them is actually unsustainable. I think we're going to have to agree, Thulasizwe, that we're going to have to allow competition in certain industries. We're going to have to accept that bailouts for these SOEs do not only have to come in the form of debt, they can also come in the form of equity. So government is going to have to stop romanticizing this notion and idea of ownership and accept that we're probably going to have to dilute our ownership in some of these SOEs. And even if we wanted to actually continuously run these SOEs, at full ownership, we don't have deep enough pockets to do that. And I think bringing in strategic equity partners, Thulasizwe, is not only going to bring in the capital, but it actually start to force some of the efficiencies that a lot of these SOEs actually don't have. But I think also the point that you have raised, there is also a function of regulation. A lot of people, business in particular, are saying that South Africa is not just an easy environment to do business. And you would have seen that in terms of the World Bank Index, we've actually declined in terms of the ease of doing business from number 82 to number 84, when we have actually said as a country that we actually want to reach the target of 50. So it therefore says our market is not actually very inviting in terms of accommodating and producing a conducive environment within which business can operate.
Right.
And I think we've been talking about this one a lot. I would have had it at the Chamber of Mines or at the mining in Daba last week to say that let's urgently put in place regulations to enable private sector energy generation at scale. Let's amend Section 2 of the energy regulation, to lift the license exemption from 1 megawatt to 10 megawatt. Allow private sector to actually self-generate. And if there's excess generation that they do, then they can sell to Eskom.
Sure.
So by opening up those industries, employment therefore gets created in those industries.
Lastly, Busisiwe, then
opportunities that we could be exploring, but we just choosing not to.
Lastly, then let me ask you, because you mentioned something very interesting that's quite topical right now, as you talk about when we think about the bailouts to the state-owned entities, we should move away from thinking about in the form of injection of cash and loans, but rather equity. And it's kind of hard for some of them, of course, to attract strategic equity partners because they are not necessarily attractive businesses like SAA, for example, right? But now you have this proposal that says, let's take some of the monies in the PIC being managed by the PIC, government employees, pensions, and it seems to be gathering some kind of favor even within government circles. What's your attitude towards that?
To actually think that we can take people's hard-earned monies, to actually bail out these SOEs, which is a disaster of our own making, by the way, let's start there, is actually criminal, to say the least. I don't think that is an option. It can be an option, Thulasizwe, when we haven't actually explored or even started to implement some of the reforms that we've been talking about. So these organizations actually need structural reform to be implemented, for us to be able to start moving the dial in as far as that is concerned. You actually look at them and you can actually see, as the CEO of Eskom did the other day, that there are issues that need to be taken care of in operations. There are issues with the balance sheet. There are issues with the income statement. There are issues with the structural issues around the organization. Can we start having the willingness as this shareholder to actually change some of those things before you actually go to that, option of last resort, which is actually going to cripple people out of their pensions. So I'm saying that is actually an easy way out, unless and until we are willing to actually, look at these SOEs, on a more introspective basis and say, what is it that I can do to actually turn these SOEs around instead of actually wanting to put a plaster into the wound? Because you give them 3.5 billion today, like in the case of SAA from DPSA, which in itself is criminal, by the way. And, 2 months later, you're actually going to have to give them another 3.5 billion. And it's actually concerning because now you have the very same government which wants to tell the business rescue practitioners what to do. I thought we brought in business rescue practitioners because we have admitted as this government that we have failed at running SAA. So you can't now still want to be in charge when we have actually given the process, of turning this thing around to independent consultants.
Sure.
So unless and until there is that willingness, it doesn't matter what we do, Thulasizwe. Our posture around SOEs is going to have to change. And until then that changes, nothing is going to happen.
Wow. Busisiwe Mavuso, thank you so much. Your passion absolutely comes through there in those statements. Busisiwe Mavuso from Business Leadership South Africa.